All right. Well, let's jump in to Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. We're on page 98. And we're on the paragraph that begins, "Sometimes we think." And he had just finished making the point that we don't hoard knowledge. We don't collect knowledge as our treasure. That's not really our way. That realization is not going to be because of knowing something as such. It's an experience of being, a way of being in the moment. It's not an array of thought. And it's very important to know that because it will definitely change how you do your practice. When you realize that your practice, that realization is not going to come through the mind, then you start realizing it's not an arrangement of thinking that's necessary. And that it's the whole practice is to get behind mind as the witness and to see. So he says, he was talking about being able to appreciate things fully in the moment, and that this packing knowledge, packing objects of relationship into the mind isn't the way to do it. He says we should not be interested in having something special. And the special he's talking about there is the treasures of thought, so that we always feel like we have an answer. We always feel like we have something to say. And he said, that's not the way. That's not where we want to go. He says, if you want to appreciate something fully, this is the paragraph just before, the end of the paragraph just before the one we're starting on. He says, if you want to appreciate something fully, you should forget yourself. Right? Because it's our trying to draw relationships between ourselves and everything else that give us the wrong idea of what things are, because things are not related to us as the center of the universe. They're not even actually related to each other in that sense. They're a unity, a singularity. And so as long as we keep breaking them up into sense pieces and creating thought objects out of them and drawing lines of relationship between all of those disparate, wrong, broken pieces, we'll only always be able to just get a pointer to the divine. We won't be able to find the divine itself. The mind will always be a pointer. So anything you do in the mind will be one step removed from the self, from one perspective.
Maharaj, could you
Yes.
explain that? Couldn't quite understand that.
That if you want to appreciate something fully, you should forget yourself, because what we do, you see, our only mistake in life is we've only made one mistake, and unfortunately it was a doozy. So it has affected a lot of other things, but we've only made one mistake. And that one mistake is that we have thought ourselves to be separate and apart from everything else. And because we've made that mistake, when we think, we take our senses, right? There's 5 senses that we know of. And we break the rest of the experience. Anything that's not us, that's not me, according to my definition, can only get to me through one of my 5 senses. So I have to break up the remainder of the singularity, of the one without a second. I have to break it up into 5 pieces in order for the mind to digest it, right? So I take those 5 pieces of information from my senses, and I create objects out of them. I create sense objects out of them, and I place those objects into my mind. Now, what my mind naturally tries to do, because it's its nature to do, is it takes those 5 pieces of information, those 5 sense objects that I've handed to it, and it tries to correlate them to find out, okay, what's different about them and what's the same about them, and how do they relate to me, this small me that I've now created. And so we create a world of false relationships between misunderstood sense objects that were taken out of as pieces from a singularity. So you see, we to appreciate something fully, we have to take all of that away, because we're not seeing it as it is. We're seeing it as we expect it to be, or we're seeing it as we've defined it to be, but we're not seeing it as it is. And so he's saying we need to take ourselves out of the center of the universe, for one, And two, we need to realize that we are not separate and apart from the rest of it. So we have to remove that ego self in order to appreciate things as they are, because that ego self is the veil that prevents us from seeing the divine. That ego self is the veil that's covering our eyes from seeing God. And the only way out of it is to remove the veil. Well, the veil is that sense of you being separate and apart from everything. So it's a tough veil to remove, because we're in quite the habit. Not only are we in the habit of seeing ourselves separate and apart from everything, we believe it's necessary. We believe we have to be separate and apart from everything. How am I going to realize God if I'm not separate and apart from everything? You see the danger of it? And so we're on a quest to realize God. Well, we've mentioned before, you don't realize God, right? Because what is the realization? The realization is that you don't exist, that there is no small self, there is no separate self. So how is something that doesn't exist going to realize God? You see, so our quest is sometimes framed incorrectly. We go into our practice with a gaining idea of realizing God. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. We go into our practice to enjoy our realization. To enjoy the fact that we're realized, to enjoy the fact that grace has covered us, to enjoy the fact that there's something called one without a second that we can't find in our mind. So we shut our mind up and enjoy it, enjoy being. And that's all. And in that presence of being, that awareness of being, that God, that beloved, just that presence is what cures the veil, removes the veil ultimately. That love is what dissolves our separateness and our need for separateness, our fear that reinforces our separateness, right? And so our practice is about unity. It's not about gaining something or getting something. And it's not about this pillowcase that Thakur would talk about. It's not about the pillowcase realizing God. It's about dropping the pillowcase. That's what causes realization. Dropping the pillowcase itself. So if you want to appreciate something fully, you should forget yourself. You should accept it like lightning flashing in the utter darkness of the sky. So you see it as it is in that flash. Because honestly, the moment is a mysterious thing. It seems so mundane to think about, but it's God. You can always know if a word is a synonym for God when it's impossible to define that word. Words like the moment. What is the moment? You can't define it. Before it's here, it's gone. What's here? Because at what point does the future become the past? If the future and past are real, at what point do they become? Well, you can't find that point. That point actually can't exist. That's why it's impossible for future and past to be there. Because that moment, if you try and slice it like that, gets infinitely small. So the moment would not exist if past and future were real. We would only experience an instantaneous passage of future to past. And we would have to imagine a moment. But the moment is what we experience, right? This never-ending moment. We can't experience a future and we can't experience a past. We've only experienced this moment.
Maharaj, but we are told to live in the present.
That is right. Because that's what I'm saying. If we take the idea that our past and future are real, then the moment disappears. See, and then there would be no God. So there would be no I am. And so we know we can draw from that. It's another way, a roundabout way of understanding that past and future can't exist. They are only concepts of mind. The only real thing is the moment. And that moment we can't really, we don't know what it is. We don't know what it is. It's eternal. It's always here. It's always here, but seemingly it passes. But there's no evidence of it passing. It never ends and it never begins. So this moment is a marvelous thing. It's the same thing as beauty. You know, you take beauty and you try and define that. Can't really define it. It's just one of those things you know when you see. All these names of God, love, you know, you can't quite define love. You know, it's always bigger than how you want to limit it. So love is another one of those things. These are the ways you know the names of God. If you didn't have the scripture to give you the names of God, and you had to figure out what the names of God were, this is how you would do it. Go out and find those things that are infinitely undefinable. Things that you somehow know, but have no way of knowing how you know it, right? Immortality, infinity, beauty, isness, existence. These are all names of God because they can't be defined. You can't figure out what they are. They defy limitation. So accept things like the light flashing in the utter darkness of the sky. Sometimes we think it is impossible for us to understand something unfamiliar, but actually there is nothing that is unfamiliar to us. There's a wonderful meditation right there. We think that we can't understand the unfamiliar, but there is nothing that's not familiar to you, because everything is within you. You have created all of the things you don't know. So how can it be that we don't know them? You know, Sri Nisargadatta says a very interesting thing. I'm still thinking about it. I'm still trying to figure out how it hasn't gone aha yet for me, but he says that those things that we know fully, we consider to be interior to our world. Those things which we do not know fully, we place in the exterior of our world. So there is no interior and exterior in reality. We just pile everything that we don't understand outside and call it that. And those things that we do understand fully, we bring it inside and we call it me, right? And so there's this separation going on. And he's saying there is nothing that you don't understand. There is nothing that's not familiar to you, that you haven't created. And to learn to live that way, how can we see God in everything and feel that separation? How can we feel love for everything and feel that separation, right? So we have to know this familiarity. We have to know it. And the way that we know it is our practice, finding out who we are, because how can we see ourselves in everything if we don't know what we're seeing? So we need to find it within ourselves. We need to find that unchanging, stable, ever pure, ever free, ever blissful, eternal moment that is everywhere with us always, but we're standing on it. We're standing on it and we're looking outside for it at the same time that we're standing on it. So we've got to stop that. We could just end the class there. If you could be obedient students and just stop it, stop standing on what you're looking for, then it would all be fixed. And I would have nothing to do next Thursday morning. There would be nothing to do next Thursday morning. All right, so we think it is impossible for us to understand something unfamiliar, but actually there is nothing that is unfamiliar to us. Some people may say it is almost impossible to understand Buddhism because our cultural background is so different. How can we understand this Oriental thought? I've been guilty of thinking that. Of course, Buddhism cannot be separated from its cultural background. This is true. But if a Japanese Buddhist comes to the United States, he is no longer a Japanese. I am living in your cultural background. I am eating nearly the same food as you eat, and I am communicating with you in your language. Even though you do not understand me completely, I want to understand you, and I may understand you better than anyone who can speak and understand English. This is true. Even if I could not understand English at all, I think I could communicate with people. There is always a possibility of understanding as long as we exist in the utter darkness of the sky, as long as we live in emptiness. Yeah, once you know that you're human, once you know what that means, you will see everybody as human, and you'll know what that means. And that will be the place where relationship is. That's where knowing happens in the worldly sense. But you'll see that camaraderie, you'll feel that familiarity when you recognize, because one of the things, we watch the news and we see this group of people doing that and that group of people doing that, and then we decide which group we belong to. And then we, then we sit there and can't how can they possibly ever think or do or whatever like that ever again? I can't believe it. Because you don't understand. You don't know yet. You haven't found yourself, because you would know that you are doing those things through their mind and through their bodies. And if you had their mind, you would think the way they think. And you would still be human. And you would still be a child of the divine. And you would still be trying to realize God. And once we begin to understand that, then the separation of each other becomes less. Right? And in Jesus's last prayer on the planet was for unity, right? He said that I may be one in you and they may be one in me as I am one in you, and your love is the cord that binds us all together. That was the final prayer of Jesus. So that's that notion. That's what we're trying to do. It's through love that we learn of our unity, because love is what? It's our nature. It's who we are. It is that image of God within. So if you know yourself to be love, then when you encounter another lover, another body of love, there's intimacy. There's immediately a place for you to connect, a place for you to respect each other, to honor each other, to encourage each other, to help each other. That's where we find our unity. Ego is always trying to do the opposite thing. Ego is always trying to see the difference, right? And after it finds the difference, then it'll think about sameness. But it starts by thinking in difference. Swami Prabhupada, I'll say it again, just in his loving, beautiful memory. Every Memorial Day, we would have that huge program in Olima where we would invite 3, 4, or 5 speakers from different religions, and we would choose a topic, and we would all have panel discussions and lectures and classes all day long on those subjects from all of these different perspectives. And Swami Prabhupada would always start the day with the exact same, this is what makes him a Vedantist. He would start every program, a Memorial Day, with the same words every year. He says, today is a day to find out our sameness. It's not a day to discuss our differences. And so today, as we look at these ideals, these spiritual ideals, we are to look for the ways that we agree. And if we run out of ways in which we agree, then we can begin to talk about the ways that we differ. But he says, I'll tell you a secret. The ways that we agree are infinite. So it's always a beautiful framing of that day. And
it's so true.
What's that?
It's so true. But we see the other people who look different. I'm being asked at this assisted living, where are you from, all the time? Mm-hmm. And I feel so much part of them.
Yes, you are. That's the thing, because what's different between us? Our bodies are different, sort of. Line up a bunch of skeletons and try and tell of which one was your best friend, you might have a little bit of trouble. Over time, we get to look more and more like each other. And until, 5 people will be 5 buckets of potting soil in the room. You won't be able to tell who John is and who Mary is. And oh my gosh, where's Swami? So That's how we need to see each other. We need to understand we're not this potting soil, this bucket of potting soil. That's not who we are. You know, that we are the ever free. We're the smile on someone's face. We're the love that they feel for their kids. We're the love that they feel for their parents and their friends. You know, we are the love that will form between us if we can see each other as we are and not as we pretend to be. You know, that unity is real. And so he's saying, you know, that he has a conviction. It's not about cultures and it's not about histories. It's not about personalities. These truths that we're talking about are about me, the me in all of us, the I, this state, this experience, for lack of a better word, this experience of being. And there's an infinite amount of power in that knowledge that allows us to be at peace and at unity with each other. There's an infinite power in that realization that will allow us to respect the most common of us. You know, there is infinite power in that knowledge of who we are to manifest love itself, to see God. And this is what he's saying. He says, I don't need English to communicate with you. He says, because I see you as you are, I will be able to communicate with you just because of that, regardless of conditions, right? So this is the answer to that. Love is universal, and the communication of love, which is what religion is, you know, being and becoming pure love, pure wisdom, that freedom is the unity that we're looking for. The communication will happen naturally. You know, look at Ramana Maharshi for that evidence. The teaching, his way of teaching, his method of teaching. To me, before I became a Vedantist, and I read that Ramana Maharshi's method of teaching was silence, I got a kick out of that. I thought that was pretty funny. It's like probably sharing everything he knows. You know, that was my idea at the time. It's like, but there's magic there. You know, I got to talk to Swami Damodarananda, who lived with Ramana Maharshi for 2 years. And he said, you know, in my practice and my studies, I would write up a list of questions for when I had my hour with Maharaj. And he said, I would go in to see Maharaj for my hour with him. And I would sit down and in quiet, as we always did. And he said, I could never remember my questions. They seemed so utterly unimportant in the presence of Ramana Maharshi. When I sat to meditate with him in silence, my questions seemed so trivial. They seemed so unimportant. They disappeared of their own accord. So see, this is something that we don't quite know. We don't quite understand. There's an infinite power in this teaching and in this knowledge that will heal our separateness, that will heal our identity as being small and apart, of being weak, of having noisy minds, of having it's impossible to meditate or to realize God. All of that story disappears when we come to know the truth. And we realize how trivial those concerns were in the light of an unconditioned love. You know, I've taken I'm not recommending that you do this, but I think it's fun to do. You know, online, there's a lot of NDEs, near-death experiences that people have put up. And there's an actual channel, an NDE channel. But the very common theme in these near-death experiences is this notion of just how trivial religion and nationalities and all of these big concepts from this side of the world. On the other side, you know, when the body drops, the experience of an overwhelming love is quite common. A love that they can't say that they can't point to anything in this world that we can compare to it. You know, but they talk about how that love and that unity is so overwhelming that it trivializes all of our experience here, all the things that we find to be important as we run around as mushy little bodies. You know, the things that we find to be important as we run around as, you know, fighting little egos, protecting our imagined territory, is utterly nonsense. utterly unimportant. And when we stand there before the divine, we won't even think about it. We won't even think about it. You'll be, especially as devotees. If you weren't devotees, then you might think about it. You might be so afraid of the new experience of bodiless freedom, you might just try and grab a pair of pants. Who knows? All right. I have always said that you must be very patient if you want to understand Buddhism, but I have been seeking for a better word than patience. The usual translation of the Japanese word nin is patience, but perhaps constancy is a better word. You must force yourself to be patient, but in constancy there is no particular effort involved. There is only the unchanging ability to accept things as they are. Right? That's patience. That's a beautiful definition of patience right there. Constancy. Just to be able to accept things as they are in every moment. To feel no need to change things as they are. You know, I talk about age all the time, and so I'm going to keep doing it. But you know, it's one of the things that I'm enjoying, you know, sitting here watching the demise of body is a big experience. And old, as you grow older, you know, of course none of us ever actually gets old. I understand that, so relax. But but as we approach this constantly receding area called old age, if you can't accept it, it's terrifying. You know, if you feel the need to resist it, to put on more makeup or to change the color of your hair or to wear a big scarf and big sunglasses, which is what happens in Los Angeles. You can always tell the age of a woman in Los Angeles by the size of her sunglasses. But you know, so if you're pushing against or resisting these things that are going on, it's misery. It's terrible. It's frightening. It's alienating. It's sad. It brings all of those things with it. But you know, if you learn to embrace it and just see the humor, you know, see the humor in growing old, in the changes in your body, it's humorous. You know, I remember just looking at my grandmother's skin and, you know, telling her that one time when we were in the car in Germany together, I was looking at her, you know, I think at the time I was all of like 5 or 6 years old. And she was sitting there and she was my grandma. So naturally I felt such a love for her because everybody loves their grandma. And she was sitting there and I was just looking at her and I was thinking how different she looked from me. You know, her skin was all nice and draped. It would drape from her cheek up to her ear, you know, and her hands, like when she would lift her arm, you know, there'd be a big extra bunch of skin under her arm. And I told her, I said, Nana, I said, I wish I had skin like yours. And she said, oh my, why do you say that? And I said, well, it looks like you're so comfortable. You have so much room in there. My skin is so tight. I'm all squeezed in here. But you're so you're so comfortable. And of course she laughed her head off at that. But you know, that's the innocent perspective of old age. How beautiful you are to have been old, you know, to have made it through this life and borne the marks of everything that you've learned, you know, everything that you've understood. It's a beautiful time. Mother's preparing you to meet her face to face in your true form, your true formless form. Or, you know, she's getting you ready to let go of this one, you know. And we you see the condition of what the body has to get into for us to let go of it and die. My God, we will hold on to this thing until until that last possible moment. You know, it's like we just can't be torn out of this form. The things Mother has to do to us to get us to renounce the body, you know.
Swami,
Yeah.
maybe we could have a retreat on this theme of aging. And
Sure.
we call it From Aging to Saging.
Aging to saging. There we go. Well, you've been in this retreat now for how many years? This retreat on aging is as old as you are and me. And that's all it does is retreat. Ultimately, we retreat right out of it. All right, so this idea of patience, of acceptance, of seeing the moment is just fine. What a wonderful practice that is. Because I mean, just think at a moment when you're feeling the most stress, at the moment when you're feeling like the most is not correct, like when you get up after watching the evening news and you're shaking your head on the way to the kitchen. At that moment, if you could just stop and say, love wins here. Everything is as it should be. It's perfect. I accept it as it is. I love it. You know, I love the suffering. I love the joy. I like the bondage. I like the freedom. All of it is perfect as it is. To have that kind of acceptance and to find that kind of inner peace, that's the quest. That's what will happen if if we can lay down this ego and stop it from constantly pinning up all of the little notepads in our mind about how we're different from everything, how we're different from each other, how we're different from the world, how we're separate, and how we're alone. Nin, or constancy, is the way we cultivate our own spirit. So it's something that's cultivated. It's something you grow within yourself. So acceptance of the moment is something you cultivate, something that you're watering within yourself, something that you're fertilizing. Nin is our way of continuous practice. We've got two retreats in one. This constancy, this continuous practice, which is a big focus of mine lately, you know, trying to extend my awareness from practice to my awareness of living, you know, to try and bring that quiet place that we have in our inner shrine into living, into the world at large as we experience it, to not to have to close the doors, you know, to the shrine until we come back later, but to actually bring that awareness with us. So this Nin is our way of continuous practice, this constantly seeing the world as perfect as it is constant practice. You think, well, gosh, how can that be practice? Well, it's because the world is perfect in this moment, not for a body. So if the world doesn't seem perfect to you, is it because of your body? You know, is it because the sun's too hot or the window's too cold or, you know, pains are too great? So it's not the body that this world is perfect for at the moment. It's not the mind that the world is perfect for at the moment. So you see, finding that place within yourself where the world is perfect as it is in this moment involves letting go of the needs and demands of a body and mind, because this world is only perfect in each moment for a soul.
Well, this is very important clarification.
What's that?
This is a very important clarification you're making now.
Yeah.
I was thinking if I was in Ukraine, I wouldn't be like, oh, everything's perfect, you know, but now this helps.
Yeah. No, it's the way we have to see. You know, there's that marvelous story of that sage. I don't know his name. Somebody will as soon as I start telling the story, so yell it out. He's sitting on a rock, meditating, enjoying that oneness, and this army soldier comes along with his regiment, and he sends a man over to get the holy man to, I guess, come over and join up or something. Anyway, the holy man doesn't come out of meditation. He just sits there meditating and doesn't pay any attention to these soldiers. And so finally the general comes over, and the general's trying to talk to him, and the sage opens his eyes and sits there smiling, but doesn't respond to the soldier at all. And the soldier says, do you not know who I am? And the sage says, do you know who you are? And the soldier says, do you not know that I could run this sword through you right now and not break my smile? And the sage says, do you not know that I could have you run that sword through me and not break my smile? Yeah, so this is an insight to what we're talking about. You see, that sage, that moment was perfect. You know, he was going to have a sword run through him. Perfect. No worries, no concern, because he knew he wasn't a body. He knew he wasn't a mind. And so what of that? How does that disturb my peace? It's having that understanding of who you are that removes your fear of death, your fear of dying. How is it that an entity that has never been born and never dies would be afraid of death? What an odd thing that is. And so it's coming to know this and understand it. So Nin is the way we cultivate our own spirit. Nin is our way of continuous practice. We should always live in the dark, empty sky. That's unity. No distinctions, no separateness. The sky is always the sky. Even though clouds and lightning come, the sky is not disturbed, right? The sky is the container of lightning and storm. Even if the flashing of enlightenment comes, our practice forgets all about it. Then it is ready for another enlightenment. It is necessary for us to have enlightenments one after another, if possible, moment after moment. This is what is called enlightenment before you attain it and after you attain it. It's the first time I've heard of enlightenment called attainment, but yeah. So this enlightenment, you know, again, I remind you, because it's an important element, that you, the you with a name, the you with a gender, will never realize God. Know that. Realization doesn't belong to a body and a personality and an ego and a mind. You will realize God means God realizes himself or herself through you. You know, God comes to her own through you. Why? Because your realization is your non-existence as a name, as a personality, as a body. You let go of that triviality. That's enlightenment. So it's not you, the you that you think you are now, that's enlightened. That you is discarded. That you is a McDonald's bag. You know, it goes straight in the trash as soon as you get the burger out. And what's the burger? The burger here is enlightenment. Then we throw the bag away. Right. So that's the view that we take, that we understand, a constant remembrance of this eternal presence, not that just we inhabit, but that we are. Right. The moment exists because we do. And that existence is God. That existence will be our realization. All right, we got a few more minutes here. Let's jump into communication. Are there any questions or comments so far on anything? Something we should go back and look at real quick? All right. Communication. Without any intentional fancy way of adjusting yourself, to express yourself as you are is the most important thing. This is interesting because he makes this discussion, or started this discussion in the previous chapter. Remember when he said that your practice is a continual expression of you. And what this does is it really puts your eyes on, who am I? Because to express yourself, you have to know yourself. All of us are trying to express ourselves in millions of different ways, you know, and we're getting very vocal about it. I'm gay, I'm trans, I'm straight, I'm old, I'm Indian, I'm American, I'm rich, I'm poor. We're all coming up with all of these expressions of ourself. And interestingly enough, they are expressions of ourself, but we don't see them as expressions of ourself. We see them as things that we've added to ourself. Right? So we identify ourselves by things that we've added to ourselves and not by things that we are, because we don't often pay attention to the internal world. Right? Nisargadatta makes that point. When we think of ourselves, we think of ourselves from the outside in. Right? We'll start off, if you start by say, who are you? Write a paragraph about who you are. First thing you're going to start is your story. your ego story. You might start with birth and history, or you might start with, I'm a young woman with curly blonde hair and I wear thick glasses and my dog loves me. That's who we are. That's who we are. But Nisargadatta says, when you're realized, you'll see yourself from the inside out. And I love that, because as soon as you sit down to write that paragraph trying to describe yourself from the inside out, I think you should do that today, actually. I think I should do that today. Write a paragraph about who you are from the inside out. See where that leads. Because what are you from the inside out? What a marvelous way to see. That's what our practice is about. It's about knowing who we are from the inside out, so that we can identify and know that to be true. Because inside, the boundaries are kind of non-existent, really. So communication is very important in Zen practice. Because I cannot speak your language very well, I am always seeking some way of communicating with you. I think that this kind of effort will result in something very good. We say that if you do not understand your master's words, you are not his disciple. To understand your master's words or your master's language is to understand your master himself. And when you understand him, you find his language is not just ordinary language, but language in its wider sense. Through your master's language, you understand more than what his words actually say. Right? So he's pointing at something quite different here. As you read that paragraph, you're thinking, oh, that means I need to go learn Bengali for Vedanta, or Chinese for Zen Buddhism, or Pali for, that form of Buddhism. But this isn't what he's saying, because he's saying here, through your master's language, who's your master, right? Through your master's language, more than what his words actually say is what you'll understand. That's communication. That little experience I had with Mokshaprana that I've shared. One of the characteristics of having something like that is, like, I'm getting myself into a bind here. But, we mentioned that when we talk to each other, I can only give you the sound, right? I can just give you the sound, and then you take that sound and you're like, oh, that sound is this word means that. And then you gather all of your own experiences around that word in order to try and understand what I've just said to you. But I'm not able to give you any of my own experience that formed that word. I can just give you the word. In a spiritual experience, the whole thing comes together, not just the sound of the word, but everything that it means, everything that the teacher has attached to that word, every memory that they have, every piece of knowledge that they have, every little nuance that they have for that word. They don't just give you the sound and let you figure it out like we do in normal life, They give you the whole piece. Boom. Wow. No thinking necessary. No misunderstanding possible, because it all comes simultaneously to you. And what a marvel that is. What an advantage that is. So through your master's language, you understand more than what his words actually say. Yes. And a master is talking to you from a very different space, communicating with you in a very, very powerful and very different way, because that separation is not being paid attention to, right? It's through that oneness that he teaches, that silence. When we say something, our subjective intention or situation is always involved, right? So that subjective world that we live in, that's in here, I can't give that to you, even though that's involved. So there is no perfect word, right? Without that spiritual realization, I can't give you everything that's in my mind with that word. I can't give you its meaning. I have to leave that to you. So there is no perfect word in this world. That's one of our frustrations. In this world, there's no perfect anything. I can't communicate with you. I can't tell you how much I love you. I can't show you how much I love you, because everything that we do and say has a limit on it. Everything, every action expires. How can I, the immortal self with an infinite love, tell you how much I love you? It can't be done. That's why there is no home for us in this world. That's why it's so frustrating for us here. You know, the way I remind myself constantly, almost every day, you know, when I feel that dissatisfaction, that restlessness of life, I remind myself, I'm like, so let me see, you're trying to buy a blanket in a world where every blanket is 6 inches too short. Stop trying on blankets. Just know there's nothing in this world that fits. So look through this world at the thing which does fit. You know, look through it at the love behind it, the story that's being told behind it, the story of this wisdom, this love, this existence, and hear it. And like our brother here is saying, learn to see it as it is, because as it is will put you in ecstasy. As it is will short circuit all of your senses, and you'll stand like Ramakrishna himself, transfixed, you know, and then I can come up and touch your eyeball, you know, see that you're not there, understand that you're not the body and never were. So when we say something, our subjective intention or situation is always involved. So there is no perfect word. Some distortion is always present in a statement. That's the whole thing. That's why Ramakrishna says when you're reading scripture, there's sugar and there's sand. Because in this world, there's always sugar and sand, always a mixture, always a certain amount of confusion around things. And we're constantly trying to minimize it, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. So there is no perfect word. Some distortion is always present. There's always that danger of being misunderstood. But nevertheless, through our master's statement, we have to understand objective fact itself, the ultimate fact. By ultimate fact, we do not mean something eternal or something constant. We mean things as they are in each moment. You may call it being or reality. Wonderful notion there. So he says, through our master statement, we have to understand the objective fact itself. So this is the real truth, the objective fact. I like that. Instead of calling God the ultimate reality, we'll call God the objective fact. The objective fact itself, the ultimate fact. By ultimate fact, we do not mean something eternal or something constant, right? Because the notion of eternal is, we can't understand it. This is great. This is really interesting things. You can't say the word eternal without distortion in our current sense of being, because we try and describe eternity in terms of time. Right? As long as you believe in time, you can't know eternity. You know, eternity is not a really long time. Eternity is no time outside of time. Time is irrelevant in eternity, right? And so what he's saying here is that your wrong ideas about who you are distorting even the words of truth that the teacher is giving to you, right? And that is how you have to come to understand and know that this isn't going to happen in the mind, that saying your mantra is not about the mind. Saying your mantra is not about the practice. Saying your mantra is the presence. It is God herself. And in that, what more is necessary? What more are you seeking? Is the presence of God not enough? You know, if you have I don't know, I'm just saying, you know, if you have a good friend in the room who's a billionaire and you're a poor man, and that friend would give you everything you need, but you don't know that that friend is a billionaire, you know, and would give you everything that you need, you sit there and you starve. And you keep thinking, oh, I've got to fix this somehow, because you haven't known your friend. And you see in our practice, you say the mantra, you just say it once. That is God. There's no difference between your mantra and God. So what are you looking for? What more do you think you're going to get? Say it 10,000 more times. Fine. What will you get? There's nothing to get from the mantra. It gave you everything it had the very first time you said it. That's the presence of the beloved. Now it's up to you to understand what you have. Now it's up to you to open to what you've opened, to come to an understanding of this amazing power of what you've just released by saying the name of God within. You've invoked presence, and that is an infinite gift that you will never finish opening. And so sit in your practice with that knowledge, with that understanding. What do I expect to get? I have everything. I have everything. To understand reality as a direct experience is the reason we practice Zazen and the reason we study Buddhism. Through the study of Buddhism, you will understand your human nature, your intellectual faculty, and the truth present in your human activity. And you can take this human nature of yours into consideration when you seek to understand reality. But only by the actual practice of Zen can you experience reality directly and understand in their true sense the various statements made by your teacher or by Buddha. In a strict sense, it is not possible to speak about reality. Nevertheless, if you are a Zen student, you have to understand it directly through your master's words, right? So this is that whole positioning yourself properly. You know, that you as a human being are an expression. You're not a thing. You're not a noun. You're an expression. You are an expression of God. So your highest manifestation, your purest manifestation, is like what Ramakrishna says, you become a whole. You become a whole through which God is seen. You don't become a great speaker. You don't become a talented teacher. Your goal is to disappear. To see things as they are, we must forget ourselves. That is to come right down to the moment in your mind, which means remove all of the noise, because thought requires past, present, and future. Thought requires cause and effect. Thought requires delusion. It requires smallness. So it is not in thinking that we come to realization. So set that aside as best you can and try and move behind it to a world that you haven't explored, you know, because you don't know how to explore it. It can't be explored with the senses. It can't be explored, you know, with the mind. It exists as it exists. It's eternal. It's outside of time. The only way to get there, the sages say, is to back in. To back in, either by falling in love with it and accepting that love, and losing yourself in that love, or through neti, you know, the denial of all of these attributes that you hold on to, and to back in to this divine reality, the ultimate fact, the love of Mother, Thakur, Jesus, Buddha, all combined, all the same. So this is where we are when we practice. It's where we try to realize ourselves to be when we practice, by accepting this amazing truth. All right, so it's 10. We'll stop there for this week. Any questions? Concerns? Comments? Good insults?
It's all clear. It's all
Clear,
clear.
clear as a bell. Now I gotta find my bell. Yeah,
This moment, huh? For this moment.
that's it. But you know, that's the thing that's beautiful, is it is that simple. And when it happens, if it's a happening, if we put it that way, it will be that simple. You know, because all the sages say it's simple. Something as plain as day, like finding your cell phone in your back pocket after you've looked all over the house for it. It is that simple.
Mhm.
And we should know that. It's not a task, it's a surrender, right? It's not a task, it's a surrender. It's not a creation, it's an isness. It's not an attainment, it's always been. So when you sit, say the name of God a single time and ask yourself, what more am I looking for? What part of me can't see that this is enough? What part of me isn't seeing that? And go looking, go hunting.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
indeed. All right, Jai Ma, those of you coming tonight, I'll see you tonight. 5 o'clock if you want to see the re-recording of the gospel. And,
I'm sleeping, I think.
yes. All right,
Okay.
Jai Ma, Jai Thakur, Jai
Thank
Swami.
you very much.
Yes, indeed.